guys, it's Willing Away and welcome back to Through the Parks. Today we'll be covering one of the most interesting national parks I've covered today. Did not know this one existed. It actually kind of surprised me. Had to look it up and see what it looked like, and it's actually really pretty. We're going to be talking about Black Canyon of Gunnison National Park. It's really gorgeous though if you look it up. Beautiful canyons. But yeah, I really liked it. We're gonna get into the overall info and then obviously follow through like we usually do with the geology, the history, and whatever other sections pop up. So starting off with the overall information, the Black Canyon National Park is located in western Colorado. There are two entrances to the park, one 15 miles east of Montrose and one 11 miles south of Crawford. However, the Crawford entrance is closed in the winter, so you can only use the Montrose one. The park contains 12 miles of what is called the Black Canyon of Gunnison River. It also contains the deepest and most dramatic section of the canyon. The canyon will continue into both the Croatian National Recreation Area and the Gunnison Gorge National Conservation Area. The canyon's name is believed to have come from the fact that the canyon only ever receives 33 minutes of sunlight a day, hence the name Black Canyon due to the fact that it is always covered in shadows, unless that 33 minutes of sunlight is happening. But in a book by Dwan Vandenbush called Images of America, Black Canyon of the Gunnison, he states, in quotes, several canyons of the American West are longer and some are deeper, but none combines the depth, sheerness, narrowness, darkness, and dread of the Black Canyon, end quote. And yeah, it's kind of all we had for overall information. This research was kind of a short one. There wasn't too much to it. The history is kind of long, but other than that, it's relatively short with like ecology and stuff. So the next section is not history, actually. It is geology. So throughout the entire canyon of, that contains the Gunnison River, it drops on average 34 feet every mile. This ends up making it the 5th steepest mountain descent in North America. The greatest descent of the river happens in what is called the Chasm View, and it drops 240 feet per mile. The canyon is named because of how steep it is, which makes it very difficult for, as we said before, sunlight to reach it, so it's usually cast in shadow. But yeah, due to this, it is covered in shadows, and it ends up making the canyon look black. And then at the narrowest part, the river is only 40 feet wide, and it is believed that the river is the primary reason for carving and creating the canyon. However, other geological events would have had to occur to also create it. So the river didn't just create it on its own. Other stuff had to have happened to help build up, I guess, the structure for the river to help cause the canyon. But it is believed the river is the primary responsibility. We're going to get into 3 different categories. These are going to be your eras. So in geology, they have certain eras, and throughout these eras, different things happen that help set up the canyon. So we're gonna discuss some of those. Starting off with the Precambrian era, that is 1.7 billion years ago. It is believed that the Precambrian Genesis and schist that formed during that time make up the majority of the walls that we see in the canyon. The lighter colored pegmatic sheet of rock was also formed during the same period. You can also find it on the walls of the canyon, and that is mainly during the Precambrian area what occurred and what was made. Next we go to the Cretaceous or Tertiary era that they call it. This was 70 to 40 million years ago. During this time, the entire area would undergo uplifting in what is called the Laramide orogeny. 26 to 35 million years ago would occur very large episodes of volcanism. This would occur from the West Elk Mountains, the La Salle Mountains, Henry Mountains, and Abajo Mountains. All those mountains would work together to help bury the area in volcanic ash and debris. Thus, starting after that, the Gunnison River would start 15 million years ago. It would start as a runoff off of the La Salle Mountain, along with the West Elk Mountains and the Sawatch Range. This river would begin to carve through the soft volcanic deposits that would start to form. Then we would get into the Quaternary era, I believe it is called. This just states that eventually, with the river flowing and slowly carving through the soft volcanic deposits, it would eventually reach Precambrian rocks of the Gunnison uplift. And since this river couldn't change its course, it would begin to carve through the extremely hard metamorphic rocks that would eventually form there. At the time, the river was flowing much larger and a lot more cloudier than it is today. Basically, with it being very cloudy, it had a lot of grit to it, so it was able to carve through the rock much easier than it would have like nowadays with how clear it is. But it was much cloudier back then. At the time, the river would start to cut through the rock at about 1 inch every 100 years, and with how hard the rock was and how fast the river was carving through this canyon, it would eventually create the walls that we see nowadays that are alongside the mountain. Now we get into the history. There are 3 different sections and then kind of like a little bit of like an overview. So we'll just get into the overview real quick. So the Ute are believed to have known of this canyon's existence for a very long time before the first European ever saw it. They would refer to the river as, in quotes, much rocks and big water, end quote, and are known to have avoided the canyon due to superstitions. By the time the U.S. would declare independence, 2 Spanish expeditions had already passed through the canyons. It is believed in the 1800s that fur trappers would have known the canyon's existence, like that it existed there, but there's no written record that they ever visited or explored the canyons, so we don't know if they were there at the time or not. The first official account that someone visited the canyon was by Captain John Williams Gunnison in 1853. He would help lead the expedition to help survey a route from St. Louis to San Francisco. He would describe the area to be, in quotes, the roughest, most hilly, and most cut up, end quote, place he had ever seen. He would eventually skirt the canyon south towards what is present-day Montrose, and eventually he would die at the hands of the Ute later that year. Thus, people decided to rename the river to the Gunnison River. Beforehand, Gunnison had called it the Grand. That was the name for the river. But due to his death, they decided to rename it in his honor, and now we have the Gunnison River. So that's kind of like the early history that we get. Now we're going to get into a very specific history. So this is going to be the Denver and Rio Grande. Basically, this is a railroad history. So surprisingly, this national park was mainly kind of set up for railroad progress. Unlike our other parks where it was like fur trapping and exploration, they really just wanted to get railroads going. So in 1881, William Jackson Palmer's Denver and Rio Grande Railroad would eventually reach Gunnison from Denver. The line was built to provide a link to the very flourishing gold and silver mines of the San Juan Mountains to back in, I believe, Denver. It would take over a year for the Irish and Italian laborers to help carve out a 15-mile roadbed from Saponero to Cimarron. This would cost roughly $165,000 per mile. And eventually it was stated that the last mile is said to have cost more than the entire Royal Gorge project. On August 13th, 1882, an editor for the Gunnison Review Press would eventually ride in the first ever passenger train that would go through the canyon. And in it, he would state the quote I'm about to read to you. So he would state, quote, "Undoubtedly the largest and most rugged canyon in the world, traversed by the Iron Horse. We had often heard of the scenery of this canyon, but no one can have the faintest conception of its grandeur and magnificence until they have made a trip through it. It is a narrow gorge with walls of granite rising in some places to a height of thousands of feet. Throughout its entire length, there is probably not a quarter of a mile of straight track on it. It is a serpentine road in every respect, and the curves are frequent and sharp. In hundreds of places, the walls of granite are perpendicular, and in many places, the road bed is blasted out in the sides of the walls of rocks which overhang the track. Another such feat of railroad engineering probably cannot be found in the world, and there is probably no section of Colorado or of the whole country where such a varied and interesting lot of scenery can be found." End quote. Thus, eventually, the railroad company would want to run a railroad through the rest of the canyon, and thus Palmer, who was, I believe, like the head director, would eventually call on Brian Barant to set up an inner canyon exploration. Brian would start this exploration with a crew of 12 men, and it would start in December 1882. It was stated that this expedition was supposed to only take 20 days, but they eventually would come back in 68 days, and this is what he had to say about that exploration. So, quote, "8 of the 12 men crew left after a few days, terrified of the task in front of them. What the rest of the men saw was spectacular and had never been seen by another human." End quote. Brian would eventually report that the canyon was impenetrable and impossible to build anything in the canyon depths. And due to Brian's report, Palmer would eventually route the railroad south, and in March 1883, it would eventually complete its connection to Salt Lake City. For a very brief time, the canyon was essentially the main line of the Transcontinental Railroad. The railroad and very early visitors would use the canyon as a path to Utah and other mines to the southwest. However, later visitors would see the canyon as an opportunity for recreation and personal enjoyment, and this is kind of where we get into that national park kind of save the environment type feel. It was after these kind of rides that people would be like, this is really special. So Rudyard Kipling, a novelist, would eventually describe his 1889 ride through the canyon as, and then, quote, "We entered a gorge remote from the sun, where the rocks were 2,000 feet sheer, and where a rock-splintered river roared and howled 10 feet below a track which seemed to have been built on the simple principle of dropping miscellaneous dirt into the river and pinning a few rails atop. There was a glory and a wonder and a mystery about the mad ride." End quote. Eventually, in 1890, an alternate route through Glenwood Springs would be completed, and since the route through the canyon had been deemed difficult to operate and not worth the time and money that was spent into it, it started to lose importance for the trains that would have to pass through, and eventually it would stop. Local railroad traffic would always continue over what would be called the Black Canyon Line, and then it was abandoned in the 1950s. Today, though, various elements of these railroads are preserved in the Cimarron area. And that's kind of the history for the Denver and Rio Grande. Now we get into another point of history that I found very interesting, the Gunnison Tunnel. So in 1901, the U.S. Geological Survey would eventually send both Abraham Lincoln Fellows and William Torrance into the canyon to look for an area to build a diversion tunnel. This would help bring water to what is called the Uncompahgre Valley, I believe, which at the time had been suffering from water shortages due to a ton of people living there and not enough water at the time. Montrose, eventually a Montrose native, an expert mountaineer called Torrance, would join them in a failed expedition to explore the canyon in September 19. or 1900. His experience would eventually prove invaluable on the second attempt, however, in August 1901. Torrance and Fellows would both enter the canyon. However, this time they would bring a small, specially made multi-chamber rubber raft with 2 lifelines instead of previously on the failed expedition they had brought just a wooden boat. So this time they had a rubber raft. Eventually, the 2 men would enter the canyon on August 12th. They would bring along hunting knives, 2 silk lifeline ropes, and rubber bags. Each of their backpacks had weighed roughly around 35 pounds. And after 10 days of climbing rock falls, descending waterfalls, and swimming over 70 different sections of river, they would eventually emerge with the first recorded descent as well as a suitable tunnel site. Construction of this tunnel site would eventually begin 4 years later and had a ton of difficulties described as, quote, working conditions at the tunnel were difficult due to the high levels of carbon dioxide, excessive temperatures, humidity, water, mud, shale, sand, and a fractured fault zone. It took the tunneling crew almost 1 year to bore through 2,000 feet of water-filled rock. The tunnel was driven through granite, quartzite, genesis, and schall, as well as layers of sandstone, coal, and limestone. Work on the Gunnison Tunnel was first done manually and by candlelight. One miner would hold the drill and rotate it, while the second miner would use a sledgehammer to drive the drill into the rock. This work required very strong and hard-working men, and in spite of the good pay and fringe benefits, most would eventually dislike this dangerous underground conditions and stayed an average of only 2 weeks. End quote. During the 4 years that it would take to build the tunnel, 26 men were killed. It was finally completed in 1909 and stretched 5.8 miles and eventually would cost nearly $3 million. At the time, the Gunnison Tunnel was the world's largest irrigation tunnel, and on September 23rd, President William Howard Taft would dedicate the tunnel to Montrose. The East Portal is actually accessible via the East Portal Road. You cannot see the tunnel from the road. However, the diversion dam can be seen from the campground. And surprisingly, that is the end of the Gunnison Tunnel's history. The smallest section of history we actually have is the creation of the park itself. So the Black Canyon of Gunnison was eventually established as, obviously, a national monument first. This happened on March 2nd, 1933, and then eventually on October 21st, 1999, it was redesignated a national park. From the years of 1933, however, to 1935, the CCC, or how we love them, the Civilian Conservation Corps, would eventually build the North Rim Road and also different, 5 miles of roadways, 5 different overlooks, and eventually was also listed on the U.S. National Register as a historical place, as a historical district. About half of the park, which is 15,599 acres, is designated a wilderness area, and that happened in 1976. Thus, we move on to the biology. So what plants, mammals, and other creatures can you find in the park? So common plants in the park consist of the aspen, ponderosa pine, sagebrush, desert mahogany, Utah juniper, gamble oak, single-leaf ash, and the Black Canyon gilia wildflower, which is actually native to the park. Common animals you can see in the park are the pronghorn, black bear, coyote, muskrat, 6 different species of lizards, cougar, raccoon, beaver, elk, river otter, bobcat, and mule deer. The park has plenty of different bird species, ranging from the American dipper, 2 different species of eagles, 8 species of hawk, 6 species of owls, the Steller's jay, and then it also does have its fair share of migratory birds. I almost said bears. Migrating bears? Sorry. Migratory birds. These are your mountain bluebird, peregrine falcon, magpie, white-throated swift, and the canyon wren. The climate of the park is described as a warm, summer, humid continental climate. And thus we get into arguably some of my favorite things to cover, which are what can you do at the park? What are the attractions? So the park usually has an annual visitor count of 190,000 visitors. This was ranging from a data pool of 2007 to 2016. The main park attraction is the scenic drive along what is US Highway 50 and Colorado Highway 92. At the east end of the park, near Blue Mesa Reservoir at Blue Mesa Point, this area was developed for camping. The area includes places for tent camping, RV camping. This comes with what is called like full hookups, as well as different canyon tours, hiking, fishing, and boating tours. Nearby is the Gunnison National Recreation Area, which has a visitor center, a marina, facilities, and 10 different campgrounds within the Lake Fork campground. The west end of the park has a river access and access by automobile and different guided tours. You can find a short hike at Blue Mesa Point Information Center. This heads down into Pine Creek and Morrow Point, which also contains different boat tours, boating, fishing, and hiking. At the south rim of the park, there's only one campground, and it also does allow for tent camping and RV camping. One of the loops of the campground has electrical hookups, and this also contains several different hiking and nature trails. So the river in the park can be accessed by very steep and unmanned trails called routes or draws, which occur on the north and south rim. These routes require about 2 hours to hike down and 2 to 4 hours to hike back up, depending on which of the routes is taken. All inner canyon descents are strenuous and are classified as a Class 3 climbing and basic route finding skills, so you have to acquire those skills to go down those descents. These contain steep taluses, impassable ledges, and lack of cover. These are what the challenges occur on these hikes, and that normal hikers are usually faced with. Poison ivy grows abundantly in a lot of the draws that are on the canyon floor. It is recommended that if you do go hiking, you bring along long sleeves and hiking boots. Usually if you're going to be hiking in a forest, it is recommended that you wear long sleeves and hiking boots and I would say hiking pants. Although you can wear shorts, that's fine. I'm a person who is deathly afraid of ticks and all different types of insects, so long pants is kind of where it's at, so, you know, none of your skin is showing. Stuff like that. Just stay safe when you go out, know what might happen, all that kind of stuff. So the flow rate of the Gunnison River is also should also be considered if you do plan on camping in the canyon. The river can get very high, and this can wash out some of the campsites that are put up. The National Park Service also warns of the following, and this is a quote from them. So, quote, "Routes are difficult to follow, and only individuals in excellent physical condition should attempt these hikes. Hikers are expected to find their own way and to be prepared for self-rescue." End quote. So, maybe if you are not a very excellent hiker, Black Canyon of the Gunnison is not for you, unless you are taking a guided tour. But if you're going to go hiking by yourself, please be prepared. As always, stay safe. That is some of the most important advice I can give. Stay safe, understand where you're going, plan it out, and be ready to be ready, just in case. If the National Park Service is warning that you might have to prepare for self-rescue, just know you might have to self-rescue, so always be prepared. A backcountry permit is always required for all inner canyon use, except at the west end of the park. These backcountry permits are free and are usually given away. The Gunnison River is designated as a gold medal water from 200 yards downstream of Crystal Reservoir Dam to the North Fork. This includes the 12 miles that are within the Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park. If you do go fishing, only artificial flies and lures are permitted, and every single rainbow trout you catch have to be a catch and release. Additionally, fishing is prohibited within 200 yards downstream of Crystal Dam. The Black Canyon is also a center for rock climbing. However, the style that is very popular there is known as traditional climbing. Most of these climbs are labeled as difficult and should only be attempted by very advanced climbers. There is rafting opportunities that are available in the region. They run through the park itself, but they are classified as difficult and should only be run for by what is classified as like the best kayakers. So if you're new, definitely don't attempt it. There are several different impassable stretches of water that require long and sometimes dangerous portages. The remaining rapids that you can run into are classified from Class 3 to Class 5 and should only be for expert river runners. Downstream, in what is called the Gunnison Gorge National Conservation Area, the river is easier to navigate. It is still very remote and should only be for experienced runners, and those are classes 3 to 4. And that ends all the activities you can do. So it's kind of interesting. This is one of the first parks where a lot of the stuff is not meant for new hikers or new rock climbers or new kayakers. A lot of it is definitely, please be experienced, please know what you're doing. Does that mean you shouldn't visit this park? No. Visit the park. Just be safe with what you're doing. If you know that you are probably a newer hiker, go on a guided tour. Those are always safe options. Guided tours are led by people who hopefully know what they're doing, and it is relatively safer if you go on a guided tour than on your own. So yeah, although this stuff does say it is for more experienced people, obviously don't let that stop you from visiting the park. There are definitely options for newer hikers and stuff like that. And if you're an expert, then by all means, go, have fun. It seems like this park is for you. But yeah, that's all I have for right now. That's all that we kind of covered. As always, until our next adventure, may your trails be filled with wanderlust, and I will see you guys in the parks. Bye-bye!